rock and roll. You have just entered. Yes, she's all over the place. Women Empowerment Series and Exploring Divine Femininity. And I have Jenn Turnham with me today, and I am so excited to have her here. Did I say your name right?
You did, thank you.
Okay. So Jenn is a very sensitive person. I'm on podcasts weekly, and I'm always, when people are asking about my upbringing and brushstrokes about who I am, I'm always sharing. When I was a kid, I didn't know the language of HSP. I didn't know the language of empathy. But as I, know now and I reflect back, I was an empath. I was a HSP, a highly sensitive person. 16 to 20% of the population have HSP. And I particularly got turned on to HSP in 2014, where there was this book called HSP by this woman named Elaine. And I'm talking with Jenn, and she knows the book, and she found out about that book through another book called Silent, and she'll tell you all about it. But with no further ado, let's talk about being sensitive human beings and what it means, ambivert, extrovert, introvert, all of that jazz. So you're in for a great episode today. I think it's going to be one of my personal favorites of the series. So Jenn, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very honoured to be on this podcast, so thank you so much for having me. It's
My
great.
pleasure. My pleasure. And anyone who wants to tune in to the YouTube, go to Katie Chonacas on YouTube, and you can see the video of how gorgeous Jenn is. She's in Australia with her beautiful blue eyes. Oh my gosh. So tell us about Jenn. Where'd you grow up? How did you get involved in HSP? What's your degree? And let's just start there.
Cool, sounds good, thanks. So I grew up in a relatively small town in Perth, Western Australia. It's like a suburb of Perth, and it was one of those places where it was really great to be a kid. So the kids used to play on the streets together. We used to ride our bikes everywhere, and it was, yeah, I was very blessed to have a really stable, lovely upbringing. I was lucky to be born to the parents that I was born to. And then when I finished high school, I went to university and I got my Bachelor of Psychology degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went off and did a whole range of different things, which I won't go into now because that'll probably take up the whole episode. But in terms of when I came across HSP, I was quite, I suppose, late coming to it. And a lot of my ladies, I find that it's not until they get into their 40s or 50s that they really kind of stumble across it. So I was given the book Quiet by Susan Cain by my dad, and he actually gave it to me to try and help me understand the introverts in my life because my dad's very introverted, my brother is too, my fiance is. My fiance's dad, they're all very, very introverted. So, dad gave me this book and said, hey, this will help you understand us. And then I felt a little bit bad because I feel like I got more out of the book for me than I did. It became about me rather than about them. And that was because Susan Cain references HSPs, highly sensitive people, and I'd never heard it before. And I looked back on Elaine Aron's research, and her research was being done around the time I finished my degree. So that's probably why it wasn't covered in my psychology degree. So then, of course, for me, that was the missing piece of the puzzle because having studied psychology, I've been fascinated by human behavior. I've kind of probably overanalyzed myself my entire life. So, of course, I was fascinated to discover this. So I started looking into it. And for me, I've always known I was an extrovert because that's quite obvious to most people. But I never felt like I really kind of fit. I didn't really fit that extrovert mold. So then when I discovered HSP, I went, oh my gosh, it was like this light bulb moment that everything kind of finally fit together. And so when I discovered I was HSP extrovert, that made even more sense because the majority, you mentioned 15 to 20% of the population are HSPs. Of that 15 to 20%, 70% of them are introverts, which means only 30% are extroverts. So it took me a while to figure out the maths on this, but it works out to be about 6% of the population are highly sensitive extroverts. So it's a very small percentage of the population. And at the time, I'd already started my coaching business and I was looking for a niche. So I thought, this is perfect because I am one. I'm really passionate about these women because the more I learn about them, the more I think they're so amazing and they've got such gifts to offer the world. So that's where I kind of started focusing really on highly sensitive extroverts, and that's where we come to today. So I've got a Facebook group full of amazing HSP extroverts, and now part of my mission is to get out in the world and educate the world about HSPs. So that's partly why I'm here doing this.
Great. I love that. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. And we'll have all the links in the show notes for the Facebook group and how people can connect with you more. What a great community. And it's a specific niche, and imagine all the people who don't know that they're HSP. I mean, those numbers can go up because there's so many people who don't know. And it is a journey to find, because I feel like we're taught to ignore our feelings. We're taught, some of us are taught to ignore how we're feeling and not being in touch. So how can we explore being a highly sensitive person when we're taught not to, feel those things? So that's just one stepping stone of, uncovering that and trauma and dealing with different circumstances of, mentioned earlier, being a victim and everyone's stuck in their own muck. And so how can you focus on the sensibilities that's happening within us when we're being so hard on ourselves internally and not giving ourselves a chance to actually feel, without the feeling of guilt? Earlier you were saying, oh, da da da, and then I felt guilty, right? Like you felt guilty for putting yourself first, right? So I think I can identify with that. Hopefully, the person listening and watching can identify with what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and I think another big theme in HSP's lives is they actually grow up, most of us grow up feeling like there's something wrong with us because we sense, because one of the skills of being a HSP is we're sensitive to subtlety. So we get this sense that we don't quite fit and that we don't quite belong and that there's something a bit off about us compared to other people. So that can come, that obviously in itself causes a lot of challenges. And so a lot of the ladies that I meet, it's just they say it's a blessing and a curse to discover that you're HSP. A blessing because they finally feel like they've found somewhere that they belong, because it is a thing and it's not just that there is something wrong with them. But also a curse because it does come with its challenges. And what I'm really passionate about is helping HSPs focus on their strengths and kind of live into their amazingness, as opposed to some of the challenges that do come with being HSP, because there are challenges. And Elaine Aron talks about the reason we have challenges is not because there is anything wrong with us, it's just because our brains and our nervous systems are wired differently. And society, we don't live in a society that is conducive to us flourishing. So we have to figure out a way to kind of navigate this crazy, busy pressure cooker of society in order for us to then display our strengths, which can be challenging.
Yeah, so a few weeks ago I was on my TikTok. It's just my last name, Chonacas, and I something channeled through me and I did my first channel and I'm like, whoever needs to hear this, just so you know, nothing is wrong with you. Because I've gone my whole life thinking like, what's that wrong one thing that's wrong with me? And I think I watched something with Katy Perry like a couple years ago and she was bawling and bawling, and it was that little girl and she connected with her little girl and she had to like go back to like 8-year-old Katie or something to like hold her hand and like go through the journey. And I did that through Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, to reconnect with your little child. And, I just channeled something like, nothing's wrong with you. When I removed myself from family members, from people in my life where I thought I was like all or nothing, anchored and hooked onto them, like a death threat, like I had to give my whole self to them instead of choosing myself first, when before I chose myself first. So I knew what it was like. But then I was like, what? I'm going through this experience and I'm like hooked in, thinking I'm emotionally bonded to these people, and then allowing people to say what they want about me, from now and from when you're younger, and then to dismantle what someone energetically saying about you, and we're playing ourselves so small, to actually remove ourselves from that energy. And then you get to a homeostasis place where you're like in tuned, in balance with your left and right hemisphere, and you're connected, and you're just like, whole. You're 1000%, we're always whole. But we were weighed down by what other people think, what's in our psyche of what other people think, or physically in an environment of, being like underneath a rock. So when we remove ourselves from that, and it's quite challenging, because with me being how strong I am and intuitive of how I am and how powerful I am, I went through that journey, and I went through that journey so I could be here with you having this conversation to make an impact, so we can share that space with other people to show you how to remove yourself from that energy that you don't see. Like, you can see a cell phone, you can see a laptop. Some people see energy, most people don't. But if you take 100% of energy, but then you take 50% of the energy and you put it somewhere else, then you're going to know you have 50% energy on this project and 50% energy on that project. And then people can understand it fundamentally, because a thought of energy turns into form, which turns into matter. But when you're talking about 1 hour of talking to someone over here, but afterwards I feel depleted, exhausted, I have to go to sleep. So you're like, let me, instead of talking to them for 1 hour, let me talk to them for half the time, 30 minutes. And then that energy of that half the time you're restoring with oneself. When you're an HSP, you may need to be alone. I'll need to run my wrists if I'm at a party under cold water. I found out through the years, I'll have to go to the bathroom and run cold water under my wrist, or put cool water on my face or behind my neck. And because my energy centers are open, so I take on other people's energy. That's why a couple nights a week, I mean, I love sleeping alone, I love cuddling, but a couple times a night a week, I'll need to just sleep by myself just to reconnect with my own energy. So HSP people have these sensibilities, and other people who have got walls up and armor up, or they're numb and they're not associated with their nervous system that you were saying, they're detached from their own nervous system from ignoring it. How could they understand your sensibilities if you don't understand yours and they don't understand their own? So there's all these disconnects. So we can be here now to kind of unpack some of this conversation.
Yeah. And I think what you said about that guilt and that putting others first and putting ourselves last, that is a classic HSP challenge. And the guilt is a big one. So most of the HSP extroverts I talk to, they have been taken advantage of, they've been walked all over, they've got plenty of toxic relationships in their lives, and it's because, as you mentioned, we're so open and we're very others focused as well. So quite often we do come last in the list of priorities. And so one of the big things that I encourage all HSPs to do is to learn boundaries, because particularly if HSPs grow up with a less than ideal childhood, the research shows that they end up more damaged than non-HSPs in the exact same situation. That's due to what's called Vantage Sensitivity, and it sounds really sad, but then the flip side of that is our Vantage Sensitivity allows us to flourish more with positive interventions. So that's what I've noticed about my ladies, is when they're doing personal development and personal growth, they're reaping the rewards of that. And I think boundaries is probably the first thing I would recommend people learn.
Two things. Two things I would like to say. One thing about boundaries, one short example is, like, for me, I'm in Los Angeles right now, and anytime I go out, which isn't all the time, but like a couple times a week, and if I'm seeing anyone new and they're just enamored by me, they're just like, how old are you? How old are you? And I'm like, I'm powerful, I'm independent, like I'm okay with my age. Like, I'm gonna tell you how old I am, like I don't care. But other people are like, oh, don't tell people your age, don't tell people your age. Well, I feel like it's lying. And I'm emotionally attached to, oh, I feel guilty because I think it's lying. And I feel guilty because, like, they can just Google me and find out, like, or, and also I'm like so attached to, like, meeting someone, the connectivity, age doesn't matter, the kinship of authenticity and truth. Like, why would I lie about my age? But why do I even need to say my age? It's like, but there's the boundary and there's a respect. So my friend, who's very strong and very assertive and knows boundaries and is just like this powerful being, recently taught me, he's just like, it's none of your business, or why do you ask, or like, that's my personal boundary. And so a couple days later it happened, and someone asked me, it was last night, And I'm just like, I go, why do you care? And it was like literally, and then I just went to the table. When I came back, that person just gave me a newfound respect. Yo, at first I felt like I was being like raw, like abrasive or something, but I walked away and I went to the bathroom and I just like chilled in the bathroom. I did like a TikTok video. I did like a creative video in the restaurant. I just let it breathe for a little bit, and I came back, and when I sat down, I actually felt good about it and empowered, and I'm like, oh wow, yeah. And then the person at the end of the table like respected me and spoke to me in a new way, also almost like not kissing my ASS or like kissing up to me, but kind of almost like like paddling upwards to me because I put myself at such a level, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what my friend was talking about. And it felt so good because I don't need to be attached to the suffering. I don't need to be attached to the guilt. We do have attachment style, which that's the second part I want to talk about in a minute. But so when we first do it, it might seem bold. Like, look at me, I'm already a bold person. But in the way of what you're speaking about, of what we just talked about, that was bold for me. I can do it for other people, but when I do it for myself, my personal need is, we all have resistances, and my personal point of resistance is personal need. I can take care of you, anyone on the street, and I can like go run anyone down and be like, yo, you need to get this person this right now. And I can make it happen. But when it comes to my own personal need, in the past, see, I'm shape shifting my energy right now. Before, I would always forget about myself and not take care of my personal needs and take care of everyone else. Now, there's no way I'm leaving unless I'm taken care of. I won't abandon and leave myself behind. I used to do that. That was the old me, and I cannot do that. I do not stand for that. I will not allow myself. I have a baseline and I have a trampoline, and I will not go through that limitless black hole and abandon myself.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful and so powerful. And I think just on the boundaries that you mentioned, one of the things that I think is like a revelation to women, because I teach boundaries in my free Facebook group, it's that we educate people how they can treat us. So what you were saying just then about, you essentially educated that person that you deserve respect in that example. And I think when my ladies learn that, when people learn that, it shifts the energy around boundaries, because as you say, most of us leave ourselves behind. HSPs have that tendency to leave ourselves behind, put ourselves last, and it's about shifting that energy and actually saying, well, if you don't educate people to treat you with love and to treat you with respect, some people won't. Some people will walk all over you, some people will take advantage
because
of you and
because they
disrespect you.
because they walk all over themselves. How are they going to
Mm,
respect you when people don't even respect themselves?
exactly. Yep.
So we're actually doing other people a favor by telling them and sharing with them how to treat us. Actually, we're raising the bar for them too.
Exactly. Yep. Definitely.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, really, really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. The other thing you were mentioning, besides boundaries, uh the other thing besides boundaries was,
You're going to talk about attachments, I think. Was that it?
yeah, so you were explaining something of being in this hole and being attached to the suffering, but then they make the choice to empower, and they make that choice. But then what happens is when we make the choice to empower and we make that choice, we need to become addicted to the empowering in that, because what happens is, since we have addictive personalities, we it's like a drug, and we'll be addicted to the suffering and to the woo is me into the cry pit circle, and we're having the pity party where we like to revert back because we're used to that and we want to befriend that part of ourselves. But the key is not to allow to befriend that part of ourselves, because it's quicksand, and it's there's no win there. But because we have addictive personalities, we don't want to leave that part of ourselves lonesome. It's a part of the suffering. And Caroline Myss, who's a mystic intuitive, Caroline MYSS, she says, you can be on the bottom, same building. You can be at the bottom floor with pollution, taxi cabs, horns honking, rats, trash smelling, or you can be at the penthouse with the butler and caviar with the view of Central Park and everything's plush and served and everything's delicious. Are you at the penthouse or are you on the bottom floor with the rats? So it's like the people who have less fortunate circumstances have it worse. And then the people who have trauma who don't do their work are at the rat level and they're at the bottom floor with all that toxic stuff. But then the people who choose to understand, they could be HSP, they could be an extrovert, introvert. And when we choose to do the internal work and we choose to go to the other side, Caroline Myss talks about having one foot in and one foot out. And she's like, it's so mucky and the back and forth. And I feel like in relationships, that's where a lot of times back and forth in relationships, we know we want to get out of the relationship, but we say because of this reason, we keep giving them a chance. We keep thinking things are going to be different. And then we're trying to stay in one boat, one foot in one boat, one foot in the other boat, instead of just staying all in this boat and drowning, or getting out to the other boat and like flourishing off into the sunset. It's that back and forth, which makes it very choppy for our energy, for our life force, for our central nervous systems, to be homeostasis and in balance. So before we can actually start doing the work that we're talking about, and we have to be at this, a blank slate to be able to have the space to do the work. I mean, that's work within itself, just to hold that space of balance in an ever-changing life force energetic world, right? Coupled with relationships and the workforce and surviving, and maintaining health. So it's a lot. And that's why we have people like us, friends, and knowing we can share this here in a healthy space and in your Facebook group, and share in a healthy space that these are okay places to have these conversations. Because I might go and have a conversation with my partner, my mom, my dad, with someone, other friends, but if it's not reciprocal and they're not receiving it, then we're going to feel down and out and worse about ourselves. We're not going to feel heard. We're not going to feel flourished. We're going to put the energy out, but it's not going to be reciprocated. And when we put an energy out, we want it to be reciprocated with unconditional love flowing, right? So don't mistake like love and sharing when there's a disconnect with someone who may not understand. They may have good intentions and want to, but now we have people like you and me and podcasts and, the great books we mentioned in your Facebook group to be able to explore these kind of things and go on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think what you said about giving that energy, because HSPs, we crave connection. So we are very generous with our energy. And as you say, if we can become a little bit more conscious of where we're putting our energy and is it being reciprocated, then it actually changes our experience of life, because we're no longer just kind of putting it out there and not getting it back and just always living in this depleted state. And I think that's really important, to just be mindful of where you are investing your energy and is it coming back to you.
Yeah. So just to be a guinea pig here, I'm on the journey. I'm so evolved in ways. I've been evolved since I was born. We all are. And then I've gone through some muck and I've had my evolvement and things I'm growing through, and like the ocean waves coming and going and shedding things off and crying through it and allowing the cry to come through, and knowing my sensory processing and knowing I'm an HSP because I'm highly sensitive. And when I hear music, it makes me feel a certain way, allowing that emotion because you wanted to explore it. But knowing when you're going to explore an emotion and you're going to explore something, know you have a safety net going in. Like, I'm going to go explore. I'm going to allow myself to go get lost and explore for 15 minutes in this emotion. But I don't want to get engulfed where I'm going to abandon myself, where I could go off the deep end here, because, people can explore places and go into very dark places. So you want to create a safety net for ourselves and have coaches and people we can talk to about things. So we can say, hey, this is what I learned, to shape shift, to say, hey, go left or right, or no need to go there. You don't need to go to that place, and choose to be, you know, choose health, right? Choose health. And that's the ultimate wealth, over the pain and suffering, which is something that's an illusion and a detachment in the mind's eye, in the body, that can dismantle that toxic heaviness, right? Yeah. So, um, yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. Do you have anything to say on those things?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on when you mentioned about emotions and feeling the emotions. I come across a lot of people who, and I think this is, you mentioned this right at the beginning, we're taught to suppress a lot of our emotions. We're taught that some emotions are bad and therefore we kind of avoid them and we don't want to feel them. But the thing with emotions is that if you think of emotion, emotion, it's energy in motion. So if we allow those emotions, if we allow ourselves to feel them and trust that because it's energy, it is going to pass. So I think that's something that really resonates with a lot of my ladies, is that because they have been avoiding these emotions, they've been running away from them or they've been suppressing them, I encourage them to just feel them and to just be in that emotion, because it will pass. I know most of us have probably had an experience in our life where we've been so crushed and so devastated by a breakup or something that's happened to us that we're almost scared to cry because we think it's never going to end and we're going to spend forever crying. Whereas if you, anybody who has actually let go and just had a really good cry, you will find that you cry yourself out.
Mhm.
And so I strongly encourage people to just allow the emotions and trust that because they're just energy, that they will pass through. And that's the
Mm.
best thing you can do for yourself, because if you
Yeah.
resist, they're going to come out at some point, but usually in a much more unhealthy, unhelpful way too.
Yeah. Like ocean, like an ocean wave. They come and go, come and go. And it might happen for a month or two, and you just have these spurts of little cries or big cries or deep cries. And just I've been doing that a lot lately. And then I raised a question to myself in reflection, and I was like a little scared, like, is this going to be for the rest of my life? Is this going to always happen? And I'm like, you know what, I'm healing right now. Let me give myself some more space, because I held this on to this for like more than 1, 2, 3 decades. It's okay. It's okay. Allow this space right now. Allow it to come out. It's not. And I said, no, it's not going to be forever, because I'm allowing it to come up now, where when new things happen, I'll be able to be more gentle with myself and acknowledge those things instead of making them deep impacted. I'll be able to acknowledge them when they're on the surface then, instead of them getting so deep, right? Um, yeah, yeah. So that's really beautiful. Really beautiful. Can we talk about your being an ambivert and your theory on what that means?
Sure. Yeah, so this is potentially controversial. I've spoken to a few people and they haven't really liked my answer. But basically, in my opinion, ambiverts don't exist, and there is a bit of science to back it up. And so bear with me, and I'll try and explain it. So essentially, the research, the science shows that that introvert and extrovert brains are actually wired differently. So when people say, so you're either born one way or the other. So you're born with an introvert brain or you're born with an extrovert brain. And what I believe is happening is two potential explanations. So if we take HSP out of the mix and we're just talking about the general population, people who say they're ambiverts, what I believe is happening there is they are born a particular way, and quite often in my experience it's introverts, and because Western society pretty much rewards extroversion, in order for introverts to be successful in life, they learn to extrovert, because it is possible. Just because you're an introvert, it doesn't mean you can't do things that extroverts naturally do. So what happens is they just become very good at stepping into their extrovert self, but it doesn't change the wiring of their brain. And what would usually happen is an introvert who's been out extroverting will probably just need a little more downtime and a little more alone time to recover from that extroverting. Whereas an extrovert goes out and extroverts, and that actually charges their batteries and they end up energized. So I think that's what's happening in one situation with ambiverts, is that introverts have just developed that side of themselves in order to be more successful in this society that rewards extroverts. And the other thing that I think might be an explanation for so-called ambiverts is there's a lot of confusion when you add HSP to the mix. So if you're an extrovert and you then add HSP, you pretty much, it's like cleaving yourself in half, because HSP and extrovert are pretty much contradictory things. So the things that make an extrovert tick and the things that a HSP brain needs clash on a regular basis. So I think what happens is, because HSP, if you know the criteria of HSP, they're much more similar to introverts than they are to extroverts. So I think extroverts who are HSP, it's almost like it drags us down the continuum to be a little bit more introverted. So it brings out our introvert self. So I meet a lot of HSP extroverts who either think they're an introvert or they say they're an ambivert. And then when I introduce the concept of HSP, and then the clash between HSP and extroversion, and they go, oh, and it's like a light bulb for them, and they just go, yes, I think that's me. So that's my theory. I think one of those two things are perhaps playing out when people are talking about being an ambivert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely can understand and identify um, with what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's well said. And I definitely relate to it because I put a lot of pressure on myself knowing that I had to be on or entertain or do something. And I can naturally do it. And I'm really good at it. And I feel like, but afterwards, I'll need to spend a lot of alone time with myself. Um, as much as I'm external, I'll have to go internal. So it's like, black, white, yin, yang. And
Yeah.
and
And I think that's the classic challenge of a HSP extrovert, exactly what you described there. And that's why I think, in my opinion, I think you're a HSP extrovert, because it seems like extroverting comes naturally to you, but then you talk about needing that downtime. And that's the balance that HSP extroverts are constantly battling, is our extrovert side craves that external stimulation, wants to go out and do things and do some peopling, as I call it. I need to go people, is our extrovert side talking. But then guess what? Because we're also HSP, our nervous system then gets overstimulated, and then we just go, whoa, we've had enough, and we end up exhausted, and we end up, even if we're having fun, we can sometimes still then have to leave or retreat to the bathroom to just have some breaths or just have some downtime. And that's because of the contradictory nature. So our extrovert side is competing with our HSP side, and if this is you, if this is resonating with you, I think the best way to think of it is a bit of a seesaw. So when our extrovert side needs to go out, then respect your extrovert side and go out and have some fun and do some peopling, but then also respect when your HSP side has had enough and you need
and
to
not
go and retreat.
explain yourself to anyone because people will be like, oh, people ask me like, what's wrong with you? Like, why do you
Mm.
have to be alone? It's like, I don't have to explain myself to you, but just to communicate. Like 2 days out of the week, I need to be alone. Like I'm doing work, I'm doing this, I'm going out, but then I'll have to just stay in and read or just stay in and think or listen to music or write poetry. Oh, the other thing I was gonna say was earlier when you were mentioning um the stuff that was going on and to feel the emotions when we're going through those I want to say what is it, traumaculous times, what is it, the word
Traumatic,
no, traumaculous
traumatizing.
traumaculous
Oh,
times. I don't know.
that
It's just
word.
I don't know. I traumaculous times. But when you're going through the choppy times, what I do as a human and as an artist, I'll nothing's wasted. Like anything that's good, bad, in between, joyful, sorrow, like those death threats or however I'm feeling. I'm being extreme here, but off the rocker, put it into poetry, do a podcast, let it out, put it onto a canvas, do a voiceover audition, create a character, like just do something, like do something, and not just like for an hour, like you know what I mean. Fine, if you need to do that, cool, but then take that and transmute it into comedy, like put it into like I said, a podcast or a poetry book, or just write it out and then rip it up. Just nothing goes wasted, it all needs to come out.
I love
um
that. And I actually did that recently because I had a really difficult situation with a member of the family where they said some really kind of hurtful and hateful things about me in a text message to my fiance. And so what I did is I felt the emotions, I went through the process, but I then actually turned it into a module in my training course. I've got a mini training course called Build Your HSP Armor, and I actually created a new module on how to deal with those situations where people are deliberately trying to hurt you or deliberately trying to upset you. So I think that's an example of what you're talking about. I just use that energy and I use that hurt to try and help my ladies, and because I knew that that would really help them to have a process to move through that thing. And I found that that helped me move through it faster, because I felt like I was almost changing that energy from nasty negative energy into using it for good. It
Love
made a
all
big
that.
difference.
Love all that. Great. And I'm sorry that happened. I can completely identify. I feel like when me particularly speaking, I feel like when we're young and we're conditioned and people treat us a certain way, it becomes normal. So if people are being mean to you, you take on people being mean to you. And then when you meet other people, you allow them to be mean to you. So what I do now, what I do now, if I am around a family member or anyone, and if I'm in a room and if they say one script, one sentence, which is a script, they say one thing that's mean to me, if I'm not going to say, please don't speak to me that way, or that wasn't very nice. If I'm going to speak up and say that and maybe stay or leave, that's one thing. Otherwise, honestly, the less controversial thing to do is just to get up and say, I have to go now. I like for me to even say what I just said is a lot. What I do now is I don't like shut down. I just get up and leave because I'm not going to shut down and just sit there and take it and allow someone to say that. Jen, and for the person watching this and listening, if anyone, I don't care who you are, if I just meet you and you say something obnoxious, or if you know me and someone says something mean to me, it's saying a lot about their character. If they're saying something mean to me, it means look what they think about themselves. But if someone has the audacity to try to dim my light, cut me down with their words, and say anything mean, whether they mean it or not, I do not align with that energy. I cannot be around that energy. I won't allow myself, because I've allowed myself to be around so many people who are so mean to me. I've been around so many people who have been so mean to me, and I've been so mean to myself, and I cannot be mean to myself, and I don't want to be mean to anyone, and I've been so mean to other people because I know what it's like to be cut down with a butcher knife, and I can cut you with my tongue, and I can do it in 2 seconds. I can build your self-worth up, and I can rip it the F down. And another person's like, oh, you can't do that to me. Cool. All right. Yeah. It's like, oh, someone won't, you can try, but you're not doing that to me. Right. But there's a difference of knowing it, allowing it, not allowing it, not knowing it, and knowing it and not allowing it. So I choose not to do that to other people. I know what it's like. And I choose not to let anybody do it to me, not even myself. I will walk. That is more important, to walk and to honor and respect self, and to honor and respect you and the relationship and the kinship that we have, and the respect I have for you and humanity and Mother Earth and divine femininity in all genders. Kindness, unconditional kindness and passion and grace and vulnerability. And if you get it and you understand it and we practice it together, great. If it's new to you, awesome. If it's confusing, I've been there, and just keep listening, keep talking, keep showing up, come to the Facebook groups, talk, connect more, tune in more. We have a lot more for you. This is specifically for you, and we honor that you're here right now.
Yeah, and that is a beautiful example of setting a powerful boundary. As you say, getting up and walking away, that is sending a very strong message that that is not appropriate. And as you said, if you made the choice to sit there and dim your light and shut down, that is you educating that person that what they said was okay. So getting up and walking away is not allowing that behavior to continue. So I think that's a beautiful example of a really strong boundary that all of us could benefit from having, for sure.
Yeah. definitely. Okay, with that being said, I feel very full and vulnerable. Let everyone know how they can find you.
Okay, great, thanks. So the best place to find me is my Facebook group, Highly Sensitive Extroverts Bright Sparks. That's where I spend most of my time. And I also have a website, jennturnham.com. And did you want me to talk about the training, Katie, as well? The
Please, whatever you would like, sure.
Yeah. So the Facebook group is the best place. It's free. I also have the training I mentioned. I call it Build Your HSP Armor, and it's starting to teach you how to not take things personally, how to move through if somebody is being personal. That's the new process that I just channeled earlier. So that's the new one that's in there. So if you feel like you are somebody who, and this is specifically for HSPs because we do get easily hurt and taken advantage of, it's a great training to enable you to start to, exactly as Katie said, see that it's more about the person who's saying it than it is about us. So it's a very empowering training to do.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Let's everyone just take a deep breath. mm. I just want to reset the room really quick and give a shout out to one of my sponsors, Universal Garment Wash. They're amazing in North Hollywood. If you need anything done on a manufacturing level with, coloring, things like that, just check out Universal Garment Wash. Thank you so much to our sponsors. I really appreciate them. Definitely check out Dreamland 1111. It's my new album. It's streaming everywhere. It's all about divine femininity, claiming your power, reclaiming one's power, true essence, through divine femininity in all genders, not just the stigma of how masculine, feminine, yin yang, woman, man, boy, girl is supposed to be through gender identity. So definitely check out Dreamland 1111 streaming everywhere. Check out the show notes below. Jen, do you have any last words, quotes, wisdoms, anything for the person tuning in?
I think I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to meet you, and I feel like kindred spirits, and I thought we would be when you said you were HSP. So it's been an absolute honour to be a guest, particularly on this Women's Empowerment series, because that's what I'm all about. And I suppose, given what we've just been talking about, the quote I'll say is "Don't take anything personally," from Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the four agreements.
There you go. Yes. Boom. You're just in sync. The four agreements. Pick it up. That's I think is that that's the second or third rule?
Uh,
It's not the
yeah, I
first
think it's
one.
this. I think
Integrity.
it's the
Your word,
second.
the
The
integrity is
word,
number one.
yeah, I
Don't
think
take
it's
anything
two.
personal. The fourth one is do your best. So
Yes, that's one of my favourites too.
yeah, yeah. I'm doing
I
my
love all
best.
of them.
During the day, I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. At
Yep.
night, I did my best. I did my best. Or, maybe I didn't do my best, but I could do better tomorrow. When I wake up, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try to do my best. That's all we can do is our best. And let's not take anything personal. When something's going on, it's never about me or you. It's whatever's, we're personally going through. So cool, cool. Thank you, Jen. Rock and roll, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next week on She's All Over the Place. Keep rocking and rolling and check out all the links in the show notes. We love you. Mwah.
Thank you.
Mwah. Rock and roll. Ciao. Bye.